The soft clink of crystal glasses echoed through the upscale restaurant, blending with the low hum of jazz music. Dim lighting cast warm shadows across the polished wood floors and the leather-backed chairs, creating an atmosphere of quiet luxury. Travis Kelce walked in, dressed casually in a fitted hoodie and jeans. His broad frame and confident stride turned a few heads, but most of the patrons were too focused on their $300 steaks and imported wine to care. Travis wasn't trying to stand out. He just wanted a quiet night, a rare break from the media storm that followed him everywhere. He slid into a corner booth and picked up the leather-bound menu. A young waitress with dark brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail approached. Her sharp eyes narrowed as they scanned him from head to toe. Her lips curled slightly in a smirk. "Water?" she asked flatly, not bothering to make eye contact. Travis smiled politely. "Sparkling, please." The waitress let out a short, derisive laugh. "Sparkling? Of course. Must be nice." Travis's brow lifted slightly. He chose not to respond. He was used to judgment, from fans, from the media, but this felt personal. When the waitress returned with his drink, she practically slammed it down on the table, causing the water to splash over the rim. "Anything else, Mr. Superstar?" she said with a sharp edge. Travis's jaw tightened. He lifted his gaze toward her, his eyes calm but steely. "I'll take the steak. Medium rare." The waitress scribbled the order and walked away without another word. A couple sitting at the next table glanced over. Travis could feel the shift in the room, the quiet buzz of conversation dipping into a hushed tension. His shoulders stiffened beneath his hoodie. This wasn't just about bad service. This was targeted. But Travis stayed calm. He had faced tougher situations than this. When the waitress returned, Travis's steak was cooked perfectly. But the service, that was another story. She slid the plate onto the table with a sharp, careless motion. The sound of the plate hitting the table was loud enough to turn a few heads nearby. A smear of steak sauce splattered onto the white tablecloth. "Enjoy," she said, her voice cold and sharp. Travis picked up his fork and knife, cutting into the steak. It was tender, seasoned perfectly, but the lingering bitterness of the waitress's attitude soured the taste in his mouth. He could feel her gaze lingering on him from across the room, her eyes sharp and filled with something heavier than simple frustration. Moments later, the waitress returned with the check. Without a word, she dropped it onto the table, letting the edge of the leather holder tap against his wrist. The gesture wasn't just careless. It was pointed. Travis opened it. $580. Without hesitation, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, setting it on top of the check. He picked up his glass of water and took a sip, his expression remaining calm. The waitress scoffed. "Wow, guess that's nothing when you're a millionaire, huh?" Travis's gaze lifted slowly. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes sharpened beneath the soft glow of the overhead lights. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms, her mouth twisting into a thin, bitter smile. "It's just funny. How you guys throw money around like it means nothing." Travis's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table. He kept his voice measured. "You don't know me." Her eyes darkened. "Please." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "You expect me to believe that you understand what it's like to work hard? To struggle?" Travis leaned back in his seat, setting down his glass. His gaze steadied on her face. "Try me." The waitress's eyes narrowed. "You play a game for a living? You think that's hard work?" Travis's jaw twitched. A muscle in his temple tightened. He could feel the shift in the room now. Other diners were glancing over, pretending not to listen while leaning slightly toward the conversation. Even the bartender behind the counter had stopped wiping glasses, his gaze drifting toward them. "What's really bothering you?" Travis asked quietly. Her eyes flashed. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fact that I'm working 2 jobs just to afford rent, while you sit here dropping more on dinner than I make in a month." Travis's gaze softened. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes now, the quiet desperation beneath the anger. "That's tough." The waitress's mouth twisted. "Yeah, well, wouldn't expect you to get it." Travis's eyes sharpened. His voice dropped an octave. "I've worked for everything I have." Her eyes narrowed. "Sure." Travis's brow lifted slightly. "You really believe that?" She leaned forward slightly. "I believe people like you don't care about people like me." A hush settled over the restaurant. Even the faint hum of the jazz music seemed quieter now. A couple at the table next to Travis had stopped talking altogether. Travis's gaze remained steady. "People like me?" The waitress crossed her arms tighter over her chest. "Yeah, celebrities, athletes, guys who make more money in a month than I'll see in my lifetime. You think you've struggled? Please." Travis's jaw tightened. His pulse thrummed beneath the surface of his calm exterior. "You have no idea where I come from." She let out a scoffing laugh. "Enlighten me." Travis's gaze darkened. He sat forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "Do you know what it's like to be told you'll never make it?" His voice was low, but the weight of his words cut through the quiet tension of the room. To have coaches tell you you're too unreliable, too reckless, to watch your friends and teammates succeed while you sit on the sidelines? The waitress's expression shifted, just slightly. "Do you know what it's like to watch your family struggle? To see your mom working double shifts just to keep food on the table?" His voice sharpened, but it never rose. "Or to have your older brother take care of you because your dad left?" The waitress's arms loosened around her chest. Travis's eyes softened, but his tone remained steady. "You think money fixes all of that?" He shook his head. "It doesn't." The waitress's gaze flicked toward the floor. Travis leaned back slightly. "I've been underestimated my whole life. Laughed at. Told I wasn't good enough." His eyes sharpened. "But I didn't give up. I worked harder. I sacrificed. And yeah, I made it." The waitress's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "So, yeah," Travis said quietly, "I know exactly what it's like to struggle." For the first time, the waitress's face softened. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. But then her eyes hardened again. "Okay," she said. "Even if that's true, you still get to sit here and spend $500 on a steak while people like me are scraping by." Travis's gaze steadied. "So that gives you the right to treat me like this?" The waitress's mouth opened, but no words came out. Travis slid the check toward her. "It's not about the money. It's about respect." She hesitated. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Travis's gaze softened. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. Just don't assume you know someone's story." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them felt thin, fragile, but something had shifted. Finally, the waitress nodded. Slowly. "Okay." Travis smiled faintly. "Good." She took the check and turned away, her shoulders still tight, but Travis could see the crack beneath her hardened exterior. And that was enough for now. Travis smiled faintly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black card with gold trim. The dim light of the restaurant reflected off its glossy surface as he set it down gently on the table. The waitress's eyes flicked toward it, her brow furrowing slightly. Her arms were still crossed over her chest, but Travis could see the faintest hesitation in her stance. "What's that?" she asked, her voice sharp but quieter than before. Travis's expression remained calm. His gaze didn't waver. "Proof of ownership." Her face paled. "What?" Travis leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the edge of the table. His eyes sharpened beneath the low glow of the overhead lights. "I own this place." The waitress's face drained of color. Her arms dropped to her sides, her mouth opening slightly before closing again. "Wait! You—" Travis's jaw tightened. "Yeah, so technically—" His brow lifted slightly. "You work for me." The waitress's breath hitched. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as the weight of his words settled over her. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. I didn't know," she finally stammered. Travis's gaze softened slightly. His tone remained steady but calm. Would it have made a difference? Her eyes widened. I guess not." Travis's smile faded. He stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. His expression remained composed, but his gaze sharpened. "That's the problem." At that moment, the restaurant manager rushed over, his face flushed with panic. He was an older man in a tailored suit, beads of sweat forming along his receding hairline. "Mr. Kelce," the manager said breathlessly, "I am so sorry. This is unacceptable. Let me—" Travis held up a hand, cutting him off. "It's fine." The manager's eyes darted toward the waitress, his jaw tightening. "She will be disciplined immediately." "That won't be necessary," Travis interrupted. His gaze shifted toward the waitress, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. The manager's brow furrowed. "Sir?" Travis turned fully toward the waitress, his voice calm but resolute. "Everyone has bad days, but how you treat people on those days, that matters." The waitress's chin trembled. Her eyes glistened under the low lights. I didn't mean to." Travis pulled out a crisp $100 bill and set it on the table next to the ownership card. "This isn't for you," he said softly. "It's for the kitchen staff." The waitress's eyes filled with tears. Her gaze flicked toward the $100 bill and then back to Travis's face. "Why?" she whispered. Travis's brow lifted slightly. "Because I know what it's like to have a bad day." Her lips parted, but her words caught in her throat. Her face was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Mr. Kelce, Travis's expression softened. "We're good." A murmur swept through the restaurant. The other diners were watching now, some subtly, others more openly. A woman at the next table whispered to her companion, "Did he just say he owns the place?" The manager was still standing there, looking flustered and confused. "Mr. Kelce, are you sure you don't want to—" Travis shook his head. "She's not the problem." The waitress's lips pressed together. A tear slipped down her cheek as she wiped at it with the back of her hand. Travis smiled faintly. "Next time?" He raised his brow. "Try leading with kindness." The waitress swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." Travis's smile deepened. "Good." He picked up the sleek black ownership card and slid it back into his jacket pocket. The room remained quiet as he stepped away from the table, his broad frame cutting through the tension like a blade. The waitress's eyes followed him as he walked toward the exit. Just before he reached the door, she called out, "Mr. Kelce?" Travis paused and turned slightly. Her lips parted, but she hesitated. Then she smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "Thank you." Travis's smile widened slightly. He nodded once. "See you around?" The door swung open, and the cool night air swept through the restaurant as Travis walked out. The waitress stood frozen at the table for a long moment. The restaurant manager approached her. Do you have any idea how lucky you are that he didn't have you fired?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on the empty space where Travis had stood. "Yeah," she whispered. "I do." The restaurant remained quiet for a few moments before the hum of conversation gradually returned. But the energy had shifted. People weren't talking about their meals anymore. They were talking about Travis Kelce and the way he had handled the moment with grace and control. At the back of the restaurant, a young server leaned toward the bartender. That was Kelce? Why didn't he just blow up at her? The bartender smiled faintly. Because he's Travis Kelce. By the next morning, the story had exploded. A diner had discreetly recorded the entire moment on their phone. The waitress's dismissive tone, Travis's calm demeanor, and the moment he quietly laid down the ownership card. The video was crisp, the sound perfectly clear. It captured everything: the tension, the shift in power, and most importantly, Travis's grace under pressure. The clip was posted on Twitter late that night. By morning, it had already amassed over 10 million views. Headlines dominated the news cycle. Travis Kelce's classy response to rude waitress goes viral. NFL star owns restaurant and the situation. Kelce's cool comeback sets social media on fire. Sports networks picked up the story. ESPN ran a segment titled, "Kelce's most impressive play didn't happen on the field." Commentators praised Travis's calm response, highlighting how he didn't retaliate or humiliate the waitress, even when he had every right to. The story wasn't about power, it was about restraint and kindness in the face of disrespect. Twitter was on fire. Kelce handled that better than anyone else could. This guy is class personified. A lesson in how to respond with grace. Even celebrities and athletes chimed in. LeBron James tweeted, "Kelce equals class. That's how you handle it." Meanwhile, the restaurant's Yelp page exploded with positive reviews. "If Travis Kelce owns this place, I'm eating here every week." One review read, "Best steak and best owner in the business." Patrons started requesting reservations just for the chance to be served where Travis Kelce had made headlines. The restaurant's business spiked overnight. But the impact went beyond just media attention. For the waitress, the fallout was personal. The next day, she arrived at the restaurant feeling like her skin was on fire. Her co-workers were unusually quiet around her. Some avoided her altogether. A young hostess glanced at her and whispered to a server, "That's her, the one Kelce exposed." She felt the heat rising to her face as the kitchen staff shot her wary glances. Even the manager was walking on eggshells around her. Later that afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, a woman approached her at the counter. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in business casual. "Excuse me," the woman said. "You're the waitress from the Kelce video, right?" The waitress tensed. "Yeah." The woman smiled faintly. "I just wanted to say, I've been there." The waitress's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The woman's gaze softened. "I've worked jobs where I felt invisible, where I hated the people I was serving because I thought they had it easy. But that feeling? It's not about them. It's about how you see yourself." The waitress's throat tightened. The woman's smile widened. "You got lucky. He could have humiliated you. But he didn't. He showed you grace." The waitress's chest tightened. "Take it as a gift," the woman said softly. "You've got a chance to do better now." The waitress swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. "Yeah, I guess you're right." The impact stretched beyond the waitress. A few days later, Travis was invited to speak at a local youth center. He stood in front of a group of teenagers, all dressed in street clothes and team jerseys. "So, Travis," one of the kids asked. "Why didn't you embarrass her?" Travis smiled. "Because that wouldn't have taught her anything." "But didn't she deserve it?" Travis's gaze sharpened. "Maybe. But it's not about what people deserve. It's about what you choose to give them." The room was quiet. Travis could see the kids absorbing his words. "Anybody can lash out when they're angry," he continued. "But it takes strength to stay calm. And it takes real strength to be kind, especially when someone doesn't deserve it." A young boy sitting in the back raised his hand. "Do you think she'll change?" Travis smiled faintly. "That's up to her." The ripple effect continued. Social media turned the story into a trending topic, not just about Travis's response, but about kindness under pressure. Kelce proves that class isn't about money. It's about how you treat people. This should be taught in schools, how to handle conflict with grace. More of this energy, please. Mental health advocates began using the story to talk about emotional regulation and the power of kindness. Podcasts and blogs discussed how Travis's handling of the situation highlighted the importance of emotional maturity. And the waitress? A week later, she was back at work. But this time, her demeanor had changed. She smiled more. She spoke more kindly to the customers. When a difficult table came in, she handled it with patience rather than sarcasm. During one shift, the restaurant manager approached her quietly. "Hey," he said, "Mr. Kelce was right about you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" The manager smiled faintly. "He saw something in you. Now you just have to see it in yourself." The waitress's lips curled into a small, tentative smile. Later that night, as she counted her tips, she pulled out her phone and watched the video again. She studied the moment Travis handed her the $100 bill, the softness in his eyes when he said, "We're good." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. A few days later, Travis sat down for an exclusive interview. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, his broad shoulders relaxed as he settled into the plush chair beneath the studio lights. The sleek black microphone in front of him caught the glint of the overhead lights. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the production equipment in the background. The interviewer leaned forward slightly, her pen poised over a leather notebook. Her smile was professional, but there was a sharp curiosity in her eyes. This story had taken over headlines for days, and everyone wanted to hear directly from Travis. "Travis," she began, "the video of that moment in the restaurant has been viewed over 50 million times now. People are calling it one of the classiest responses they've ever seen. But I have to ask, why didn't you fire her?" Travis's smile was faint but steady. His hands rested loosely on his knees, his posture open and relaxed. "That's not how you teach people." The interviewer raised a brow. "What do you mean by that?" Travis's gaze sharpened slightly. His voice remained calm, but there was weight behind his words. "You don't change people by punishing them. You change them by showing them a better way." The interviewer's head tilted slightly. "But most people wouldn't have handled it like that. You had every reason to be angry." Travis's expression softened. "Sure, but anger doesn't fix anything." His gaze drifted downward for a moment before lifting again. "Look, people have bad days. I've had them too. And sometimes you take it out on the wrong person. But that doesn't mean you respond with more anger. That's not strength. It's weakness." The interviewer's pen hovered over her notebook. "Do you think she learned her lesson?" Travis's mouth curled into a faint smile. "I hope so." "Did you speak to her after that moment?" Travis nodded slowly. "Yeah, a couple of days later I stopped by the restaurant. She apologized, but I told her there was nothing to apologize for." The interviewer's brow furrowed. Why not? Travis's gaze steadied. Because we've all been there. The interviewer smiled faintly. But Travis, you could have humiliated her. You could have made an example of her. Why didn't you? Travis's smile deepened. Because that's not how you win. The interviewer's pen was still. So how do you win? Travis leaned forward slightly. His eyes sharpened. You win by treating people with respect, even when they don't deserve it. The interviewer's gaze lingered on Travis for a long moment before she spoke again. And what would you say to people facing similar situations? Travis's jaw tightened for a brief second before his expression softened again. Take the high road, always. It's easy to respond with anger when someone disrespects you. It's harder to stay calm and respond with grace. But that's where the real strength is. The interviewer smiled. Final question. What's next for Travis Kelce? Travis's eyes glinted. Football season's coming up, but off the field? He smiled faintly. Let's just say, I'm not done yet. The camera zoomed in slightly on Travis's calm expression as the studio lights dimmed. The sound of the director calling "cut" echoed in the background. Travis leaned back in his seat, his gaze lingering thoughtfully toward the floor. What do you think? Did Travis handle this like a pro, or did the waitress deserve more consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you think Travis showed true class, hit that like button. Share this video and subscribe for more incredible stories.